Welcome to How to Be Interesting 101. Now, I'm a huge fan of the idea that it's more important to be interested than it is to be interesting, right? Because all of the gimmicks in the world, all the props, all the whatever that you could bring in to make yourself interesting won't overcome the perception and feeling that somebody else gets when they know you're not listening to them, you're not caring about them. And so being interested is more important than being interesting. However, if you make the choice to commit to this video, I promise you that the tools and really practical ideas that I'm gonna share can make you a better leader and a better educator and a better parent and a better spouse, a better friend, a better colleague. Because when we are intentional about how we are answering our questions, we become somebody that people want to be around. And I recognize that's a big promise, and so the way that I'm gonna keep it is by sharing 3 particular stories that I think you're gonna love that have 3 practical ideas attached to them that I shared in a keynote with a group in Austin, Texas just last week. Let's get into it. I met my wife, Kate, living on an Anishinaabe American Indian reservation in northern Minnesota. We were living on the reservation for a month, solely there, not to do anything, fix anything, change anything. We were solely there to listen and learn from elders and medicine men and participate in sweat lodges and drum circles. And it was a really intense and dense experience. And one of the elders that we listened to told this unbelievable story about, in his words, the one-eyed Indian boy. And it talked about this kid that from a very young age was picked on and bullied and singled out because he had one eye. And he told a story of hardship, and it was like really emotionally invoking. And it wasn't until the very, very end of the story that he took off his glasses and tapped his right eye. Like sent chills down all of our spines because he was the one-eyed Indian boy. And in that story lies, I think, one of the most powerful truths about how to be interesting, which is your truth is interesting, right? The story about the one-eyed Indian boy was, we were listening to it, but when he tapped his right eye and all at once we realized, holy smokes, this is a true story. This is him, this is his story. It all of a sudden got so much more interesting. And so just a reminder, I think sometimes we undervalue our own truth and undervalue our own experience. And there's so much power as you're watching this video right now to just own that. Believe that your truth matters and speak it as if it does. The other day I was watching Ali, which is the movie based on Muhammad Ali where Will Smith plays Muhammad Ali. And in it, Ali shares an experience about meeting one of these Beatle guys, John Lennon. And he shares the quote, "The more real you get, the more unreal it gets." Right? And so in terms of the Beatles, in terms of fame, in terms of Muhammad Ali, right? The more real you get, the more unreal it gets. And I think there might be some truth in that. I told you these stories I shared during a keynote in Austin, Texas. And that keynote was at an event for Southwestern University for the Career Development Center. So we have all these students coming in who want to get jobs that they're excited about, passionate about, etc. And I'm helping them ask better questions in interviews and how to be more interesting and tell better stories, etc. I did the same event last year, and I remember one student very specifically. Her name was Rebecca, probably still is Rebecca. And the reason I remember her is I'd recorded a personalized video for the group beforehand and asked a question, asked for them to leave their answer in the comments. And everybody left, stock answer of, I'm an English major studying blah, 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 blah. Except for one student, Rebecca, who really shared a bit of her story. She shared her passion right now and interest for animal safety and how she was studying this. She gave more context. And the power, right, immediately Rebecca was more interesting in that context, in those comments. Rebecca was more interesting than everybody else because she chose to be specific about what she was sharing. In fact, one of my good friends and mentors, Brenton, one of his teachers used to say that a choice of words is often a choice of worlds. And in Rebecca's case, she changed her world with her words because she shared all of that. What she didn't know is my sister happens to work in LA on movie sets with animals. And so I replied back to the comment and said, Rebecca, blah, 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 any interest in meeting my sister? And she was like over the moon, excited, had no idea that this was gonna happen. If she didn't share that interest or that passion, it never would have happened. And so a reminder that sometimes, right? Answering the question, how are you, with more than good, fine, etc., actually creates connections for people, right? If you just like add a little bit more details, something that people didn't ask for, be a little bit more generous in your sharing, it can actually create some really beautiful moments. My favorite story is about Luke, and Luke came up to me after the keynote and said, okay, I've been sitting here this whole time and I've got a really particular question. If you're in an interview or a conversation and somebody asks you, what's your story? How the heck do you answer that question? One of the ways that I answered that for him was to parse out a synopsis from a story, right? When you're in an interview context specifically, when somebody asks you, what's your story? Or even if you're at a networking event, you show up, what's your story? We like go to LinkedIn in our mind and we're like, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. We like start reading off a resume. Totally not interesting. This video is focused about how to be interesting. And so I would say if you can shift from synopsis to story, there's some serious power there. And so the example that I gave to him just off the cuff was to say, you're in an interview, you can say, well, I had an internship, and I was a business major, I believe. And so, I had an internship at this financial institution, and this is how it went, blah, blah, blah. And then I went and did this, and I took this course. Boring, like totally not interested in that play-by-play. As opposed to the exact same experiences, you could say, I had this mentor, Mark, who, as I was working with him, taught me Excel times 1,000. He just exploded my brain about how to use Excel, what you can do, how to manipulate numbers, visualize data, etc. It was this really amazing learning experience. And that led me into Mark was just the internship supervisor, and he was just learning Excel. But when you frame it as a story that Mark helped teach and explode my brain about Excel, it becomes a story, not just a synopsis. When you say I have an internship, it's almost meaningless. Now, most of you watching this aren't doing internships anymore. And so I would actually expand it. One of the things that I think is so unbelievably uninteresting is when somebody says, oh, I have been doing this for 20 years. What happened in those 20 years, right? I'm not necessarily interested in that. As opposed to saying, in the last 20 years of working, I have had some really intense failures that have left my cheeks very blushed and very embarrassed. And I've also had some major wins that have made a huge difference in my world and the world that I'm operating within. Right? Just a little bit more story, right? That idea that specificity is the soul of narrative. If you're intrigued about the other side of how to be interesting, you'll love this video on how to make people like you in 90 seconds. The title's a lot deeper than you might expect.